Today, I'm bringing you 10 players that I believe are going to be booming in your lineups going into week 4. Some of these players are a little bit controversial. Some of these players I think a lot of people aren't going to like. But listen, hear me out. Give them one more week because I really believe they could have, once again, a boom performance going into week 4. So let's not waste any more time. Before I get into it, I got some honorable mentions at the end of the video, so stay tuned towards the end. All right, my first player on this list is a running back, and that is Josh Jacobs. Okay, so far he's been very underwhelming in the season, hasn't found the end zone as well so far this year, which has been disappointing, right? He is somebody that you spend a good draft capital on him, mid to late rounds pick in your drafts, right? But I think the context there is missing because he's missed training camp, he's missed preseason, he missed a lot of times to get his football legs back under him. He needed to get hit, and I think these first 3 weeks that we saw with Josh Jacobs, that was him getting acclimated back into the NFL, back into his football shape. Not saying he wasn't staying in shape in the offseason, just saying he needed to get acclimated and get, the chemistry with Jimmy G. He needed to get back the chemistry with his O-line. Little things like that he needed to get back. So he's playing the Los Angeles Chargers this week, and I do believe he could have his first big game. And the reason why you drafted him, once again, in that mid to late round pick in your NFL drafts, the Chargers currently give up the 12th most fantasy points to the running back position. And let me tell you, these past 2 weeks, the running backs and how many points they gave up to that position. Week 2, Derrick Henry against the Tennessee Titans here, his only good game of the season so far, over 25 attempts, 80 yards and a touchdown, over 18 fantasy points on that week. Week 3, I think we could all agree that the Josh Jacobs is better than this running back, and that is Alexander Mattison. 20 attempts, just under 100 yards, over 17 fantasy points coming into week 3. Look, they need to get the ball rolling, and what they can do in this week and set the foundation for the rest of their season is get the ball rolling here versus the Los Angeles Chargers going into week 4. Okay, give Josh Jacobs one more chance. He will have a boom week. He is somebody that I am starting with confidence in many of my leagues, even though I know a lot of people are questioning Josh Jacobs moving forward. Okay, let's go to my second player, and I know a lot of people are either going to click off this video immediately once you hear this name. But hey, we've been getting a lot of criticism about him so far, but I think you have to give him one more week, because if there is a week that this player can bounce back, can have the best game, I would say, of his career, or of the season so far, it is this week, and that is quarterback Justin Fields versus the Denver Broncos. I understand you're probably questioning. You probably drafted Justin Fields and saying in a 2-quarterback league and a 1 quarterback because of the rushing upside, and we haven't seen that. I get it. I did that. I'm in the same position as you. I'm in the same position where I drafted Justin Fields saying this guy is going to rush over 1,000 yards and he's going to have a phenomenal year and he should be progressing in the passing game, which we haven't seen so far. I understand. But if there is a week that he can do that, that is this week against the Denver Broncos. The Broncos currently give the second most fantasy points to the quarterback position. Look, if there is a week that he can do it, is this week. He still is progressing. He's still understanding. He's still getting acclimated with DJ Moore. And the things that we haven't been seeing is him progressing in the passing game. That's okay, because if he doesn't progress there in a dynasty perspective, that's upsetting. But in a redraft perspective, if he can go back to the rushing opportunities that we all expected him to have, he's only had 24 attempts so far and just over 100 yards. That's not good enough in my eyes for the Justin Fields that we saw in the second half of the season last year. Okay, I'm expecting him to have, over 20 attempts, I would say 22 attempts on the ground as the quarterback alone, and maybe 200 yards. That sounds ridiculous, but that was what Justin Fields was doing last year. He was doing some ridiculous things on the ground and going for these big, massive plays. And once again, if there's any other team that can give him that opportunity coming into week 4, it is the Denver Broncos, once again, who currently give the second most fantasy points to the quarterback position. And granted, I was probably over-exaggerating the averages that he was doing, but it's true. Like, it felt that way at the time, right? I mean, he was doing some great things, so keep that in mind. Don't take that out of context. I understand. Let's go to the other side of the ball there at the running back position. Javonte Williams versus the Bears. Another person that has been a little bit, not underwhelming. I think a lot of people overestimated his expectations because he was ready in the first part of the season in week 1, which I don't think any of us predicted that he was going to be like, you know what, if he's going to miss time, he probably missed the first 4 weeks. He's been playing the first 4 weeks, hasn't found the end zone, and he has progressively been getting more and more opportunities coming into the season. Now you look at what his backup has been doing, Samaje Perine. He has been digressing his snaps as well, right? In week 1, 45 snaps. Week 2, 50 snaps. I can understand that. That's a little bit higher. But in week 3, 31% of the snap share that he got, Samaje Perine. And maybe that was because of the game script, because the Dolphins put 70 points on them. But I think if there is a game, once again, that the Bears or that Javonte Williams can have, it could be versus the Bears. Kind of the same thing with Josh Jacobs. Let's look at this teams and the running backs that the Bears have given, how many points they've given up to the opposing running backs in the past 2 weeks. And once again, I would say everyone would agree with me that Javonte Williams is a lot more talented running back than both of these running backs I am about to mention. Week 2, Brian Robinson, 18 attempts, just over 80 yards, 2 touchdowns, 28 fantasy points. He was a top 5 running back that week. That was kind of crazy. No one was expecting that, right? Week 3, Isaiah Pacheco, 15 attempts, 62 yards and a touchdown, over 15 fantasy points. Not only that, Jerick McKinnon found the end zone twice that week as well. Javonte Williams is clearly better than both of these guys, and if he is getting to 100% coming into week 4, just like you kind of see them getting more and more workload, progressing in each week, understanding, getting used to that knee that he tore, that ACL, getting cuts. You know, he was a great missed tackle back in 2021 or when he got drafted. This is the type of things that we can see from Javonte Williams, specifically this week versus the Chicago Bears. So he can definitely have a boom week, and somebody that I am starting with confidence coming into this week. All right, let's go to the tight end position. A homer pick for me, Darren Waller versus the Seattle Seahawks. Another guy that has been underwhelming so far, but at the same time, you have to understand that the tight end position is very volatile. He's tied in 8 on the season, and it's okay, right? Like, he hasn't been that boom crazy target of a game that we were all expecting from him. And plus, he hasn't found the end zone yet either. Now, he's not the Travis Kelce where he's going to get you 15 plus fantasy points or 20 plus fantasy points, to be honest, with Kelce each and every week. He is somebody that you were hoping that is going to be above the margins and be above these tight ends so far, which once again, tight end 8 is not terrible. And you have to really understand the context. Week 1 against the Cowboys, which we got slapped on and it was raining. Throw that game out the window, okay? Because in the second half, a lot of our players sat out besides Daniel Jones, which was frustrating. Week 2 against the Arizona Cardinals, I feel like he didn't have a target in the first half of that game. Second half of that game, Daniel Jones comes out, started hitting Darren Waller, caught 6 out of 8 targets, over 70 yards, had over 13 fantasy points. And then against the 49ers, they just couldn't get anything done because of our offensive line with all those injuries. Now, coming into week 4, it looks like Andrew Thomas is trending towards the right direction. It looks like Saquon Barkley is trending toward the right direction. And when both of those guys are on the field, you can open up the passing game for Daniel Jones coming into week 4. So once again, Darren Waller, I think the expectation right now feels underwhelming of what we saw so far in the 3 weeks is underwhelming, but I think the expectation is still going to be there, what we expected him to be going into the rest of the football season. So stay tuned for that, okay? My next player here, T. Higgins versus the Tennessee Titans, somebody that I'm really excited about, that I truly believe could have a boom week coming into this week. He is playing the Tennessee Titans, who currently give the 4th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. Okay, before I even get to T. Higgins, let's understand who the Titans played these past 2 weeks. They played this past week the Cleveland Browns. You know who had two wide receivers that had great games, Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore. Amari Cooper against the Tennessee Titans, over 24 fantasy points, over 160 yards and a touchdown. Elijah Moore had a decent, good flex, still had the targets, over 11 fantasy points in week 3. Go even back to week 2 against Los Angeles Chargers, Keenan Allen, over 30 fantasy points that week, over 10 targets, over 100 yards, and not even that. Mike Williams also had over 15 fantasy points that week versus the Tennessee Titans. So if you're concerned about, oh, it's going to be Jamar Chase, oh no, it's don't worry about it, it's going to be Joe Mixon, it's going to be both of them. is going to be T. Higgins and it's going to be Jamar Chase, because what we've seen so far with the 2 wide receivers and Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore and Keenan Allen and Mike Williams in those weeks, both of these guys should be eating coming into week 4. Yes, T. Higgins has been up and down, but what is the context? In week 1 versus the Cleveland Browns, T. Higgins caught 0 out of 8 targets, but he was targeted 8 times. The context also of that game, it was raining the whole time. Not many people had fantasy relevant wide receivers that week. Week 2, he had his boom game where he did his thing, right? Nobody was questioning him. T. Higgins was like, oh, we're back to the old T. Higgins here. Had over 28 fantasy points, 12 targets. And this past week, this past Monday versus the Los Angeles Rams, where he caught 2 out of 8 targets. And I went back and watched that game and I was also watching that game live. It was not saying it was all on T. Higgins. I would think it was a little bit on Matthew Stafford and T. Higgins, where Matthew Stafford overthrew him, underthrew him, threw the ball behind. But I would say the majority of it, in my opinion, it was on T. Higgins. I look back, if I counted correctly, I think he dropped 4 out of the 6 targets that he didn't catch. So he did have a game, and it was a bad game. Now everyone is panicking. T. Higgins is bad. We're getting comments. I mean, because I bought him a couple of days ago saying you should be buying T. Higgins on the low, and I still believe that. People are panicking on T. Higgins because of the one bad game. In reality, if you think of the context that he has had, he didn't have a bad game in week 1. It was just more of the context, right? What was the context in that week? So keep that in mind. T. Higgins, in my opinion, will have a boom game versus the Tennessee Titans, once again, who give the 4th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. All right. Remember, guys, I have some honorable mentions coming at the end. This is my last player on the list here, Zay Flowers versus the Cleveland Browns here. Wide receiver 31 on the year at the moment, and he is playing the Browns. Now, I kind of just mentioned earlier that the Browns have a good defense, right? I think I kind of mentioned that earlier in this video. Maybe I'm just getting confused with a different video. But the Browns currently give up the least amount of fantasy points to the wide receiver position. But what's the context there is that 2 of their top wide receivers, or 2 of their main wide receivers, in OBJ and Rashad Bateman, is going to be missing time here. And what Zay Flowers has done so far has been great. Okay, week 1 caught 9 out of 10 targets, over 7 fantasy points. Week 2 against the Bengals caught 4 out of 5, a little bit underwhelming, but still had 10 fantasy points because of those target discrepancies. Now you go back to week 3 against the Colts, caught 8 out of 10 targets, over 13 fantasy points, and that was with OBJ and Rashad Bateman in the game. Look, none of these guys, because both these guys have been averaging, I would say, significantly less amount of targets per game, to be honest with you. But Zay Flowers is still going to be getting an uptick in production. The number 1 target on this team is going to be Mark Andrews. I think we all agreed on that coming in. But Zay Flowers is a close second with the targets that he has been getting, and we have to respect that. But we also have to respect the Browns' defense. This is a divisional game, we had to understand. But I do believe he could have a boom game. This is one of these games where, like, I think the whole fantasy community is telling you should be sitting him. You should be sitting him because they do give up the least amount of fantasy points to the wide receiver position. But this could be the game where Zay Flowers has his highest finish, and we're saying, well, what the hell happened to the Browns defense? Because it's a divisional game, anything could happen. So once again, guys, Zay Flowers, T. Higgins, Darren Waller, Javonte Williams, Justin Fields, and Josh Jacobs are my 6 boom players that you should be starting going into week 4 and setting them in your lineups with some confidence. Hopefully I bought you some confidence a little bit there. And let's get to my honorable mentions. I said I'm gonna bring you 10 players. These are my 4 honorable mentions coming into this week, and that's Russell Wilson. Surprisingly, look, he's been great. He's RB10 or QB10 so far. And look, he's been doing all right. 19 fantasy points week 1, 32 fantasy points against Washington, 17 fantasy points. So I didn't want to go too deep into Russell Wilson, but if you are struggling at the quarterback position, and maybe in a 2 quarterback and a 1 quarterback league, Russell Wilson, start him in. He's been having decent games. He's the QB10 right now. He could be the old Russell. Let him cook. Alexander Mattison, who we spoke about a little bit earlier here, I think the door is still open a little bit, still cracked with some opportunities for you to start him, because I don't think Cam Akers is going to be acclimated so far coming into week 4. And what we saw this past week, over 7 fantasy points here. And Alexander Mattison is playing the Arizona Cardinals, who, you know, what we saw against them not the Arizona Cardinals, playing the Carolina Panthers, and what we saw against them against Seattle, what Kenneth Walker did. I'll be really excited to start Alexander Mattison coming into this week. Tank Dell, who has already been having boom game 2 over 20 fantasy points games, getting significant amount of targets, 10 targets in week 2, 7 targets in week 3. That continues here coming into week 3, playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, who give the 12th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So be happy, be ready with that. Be happy and be ready to start Tank Dell. And now I'm going to take you to one that I truly believe could have a boom game, but I think it's a little bit hesitant. But hear me with the context, and this is why I didn't bring him, because I don't want to tell you guys to start him, but I do think he's an honorable mention. I understand why you don't, and that's why I have him here. Okay, Chris Godwin. With the historical games with Mike Evans versus Marshawn Lattimore and the Saints hasn't been good. And let me tell you why. Let's go back to this past year in 2022 against the Saints. You think of the games that he's had, right? Against New Orleans, under 10 fantasy points in 1 week. And the other week, under 10 fantasy points again. So the two divisional games against the Bucs or Saints, Mike Evans has scored 10 fantasy points. That was in 2022. 2021, let's go back to 2021. Mike Evans, one game versus New Orleans here, he scored a touchdown but only had 4 targets. Very underwhelming. He saved his game with that touchdown, but just only 12 fantasy points, which is underwhelming for Mike Evans. Then you go to the next game where he had scored under 5 fantasy points. So if you can see the trend there, like Mike may not get those huge targets. They tend to divert from Mike Evans when he goes against Marshawn Lattimore. Maybe it's different now with Baker Mayfield, but hey, this could be the game for Chris Godwin, who hasn't been terrible, just underwhelming based on where you drafted Chris Godwin coming into this year. A lot of people draft him as a 4th round, 5th round, saying that him and Baker Mayfield are going to have the connection. In reality, it was Mike Evans, but this could be the game where he can have his boom Mike Evans game that everyone was hoping and expecting for. So keep that in mind, guys. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully I put a little bit more confidence coming into your weeks, and going into week 4, I'm going to be starting all those guys with some confidence there. Once again, comment down below with any questions, concerns, trade questions, start sit questions. We go live every single day, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, to answer all of your start sit questions. And before I let you go, flockfantasy.com/land, the best place to support what Zach and I are doing here. Go there, over 300 plus players that he is ranking for you to start and sit going into each and every week. So once again, flockfantasy.com/land. Like, comment, subscribe, guys. And as always, it's all love.
Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.